All right, well, welcome everyone to Minnesota SCORE's presentation on buying and selling a business. I am Diane McKeever. I'm the education chairman of our chapter and arrange for all of our webinars. Today, we have a very exciting webinar on buying and selling a business, but more importantly, we have four amazing presenters, Jory Berkowitz, Michael Zuckerman, Alan Gorlick, and Peter Gruitz. Usually we have one, maybe two presenters, but today we have the top of our chapter here, the most experienced people who know how to buy and sell a business. Before we get started with their presentation, I would like to tell you a little bit about SCORE. SCORE is a nationwide nonprofit organization sponsored by the SBA. We provide free confidential business mentoring. If you have a business, if you're thinking about having a business, you should have a mentor. We can help you over the bumps in the road that you're going to experience. Our chapter, the Minnesota chapter, has nearly 90 volunteers, and we serve Manatee and Sarasota counties. Our chapter has recently been recognized as a district chapter of the year. SCORE in general, SCORE nationwide, has assisted over 11 million clients since their inception almost more than 50 years ago. So in what way can we help you with your business? Well, we can help you in any aspect of your business. You woke up this morning and had an idea, we can probably help you determine whether that idea has legs or not. You've opened a business and you need some help in that, or you want to grow your business, or as today, you want to sell or close your business. We have teams of people who can help you do all of the above. We encourage you to visit our website, visit minnesota.score.org. There you can easily request a mentor. There are nice buttons for you to do that. You can find a workshop like this. We have workshops almost every week on Wednesday at noon on a variety of topics. You can sign up for them. You can locate recorded podcasts that we have available, or look through our library. We have all kinds of templates and other documents that will help you in your journey. And lastly, I'd like to thank our sponsors and community partners. Without them, we don't have any lights on. And as you can see, our gentlemen all have their lights on. So we know that we're being supported by the community, and we would like to give support back to them. So before we start our webinar, I've been asked to initiate a survey. This survey is a very simple one. It only has 2 questions. I think we can handle 2 questions. Let me see if I can launch this survey. I have done this before successfully, but not as successful today. Let's see. Save it. Something went wrong. Oh, don't you love it when they say something went wrong? Okay, you know what? We're going to continue with our presentation while I work this out. So I would like to turn this over to Peter Gruitz, who will start our presentation. So Peter, take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody, and we're so happy you're here. You know, this is one of the most challenging things facing entrepreneurs, is how to buy, sell, or pass on their business. And many people ask me, well, why would I ever want a business? There's a lot of challenges to that, and there are. Today we're going to talk about the considerations you have in thinking about where you are in a business, what is the cycle for selling, how do you value that business? What are some of the issues that you have to do in reference to raising adequate funds for it, to buy it or sell it? And then, of course, what are the legal trap doors that are out there that you have to be aware of? I think you're going to enjoy it very much. Let me introduce our speakers today. First is Jory Berkowitz. And Jory has been a vice president of Merrill Lynch, has been in the financial services business for a long time, and is also a real estate investor and a renowned author. He's written 2 really great books. I enjoy them very much. In addition to Jory, we have Alan Gorlick, and Alan is been a financial planner, a teacher, professor, entrepreneur, and he really understands the world of finance. And then, of course, we have Mike Zuckerman. And Mike has been in practice over 50 plus years in New York State. He is also a graduate from Wharton and from Harvard Law School. And he put some of the original bricks in Harvard Law School, I understand. So that's it. And me, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've owned and operated 3 different businesses, primarily in the high-tech field. So that's who we are as people, and I think you'll find everybody's presentation to be pretty much on core. Let's talk a little bit about buying and selling a business. Diane? Okay, well, first I should talk about what you have in front of the screen. So we have a number of people who are interested in buying a business, a number of them that are interested in selling a business, and a number who are just interested. And are you currently working with a SCORE mentor? We have 25% of you or so are working with a SCORE mentor. We're glad to hear that. The rest of you, hopefully after we've had this conversation, will want to have a SCORE mentor as well. Diane?
Very good. I think everybody was able to see our results. So let's move on.
So when to ask, if you're going to sell a business or you're going to buy a business, you have to either ask yourself these questions or you have to ask who's going to buy the business from you. And the first one is, why do you want to buy my business? You know, strangely as it sounds, a number of people walk into a place and say, how much do you want for this business? And I asked that question many times, and people say, well, I don't know. Well, you know, don't give an answer until you've figured it out. So why do you want my business? You want to know what their intention is in buying the business. Next,
Oops.
Click again.
Yep. Thank you.
What do you know about my industry? If you're thinking of selling your business to somebody, you have to realize that much of the success you're going to have in monetizing that sale is going to be the success of the person who's buying your business. And so you don't want to sell it to somebody who doesn't even know how to spell the business that you're in. So an important question is to ask, what do you know about my industry? You're not giving any secrets away when you ask these questions. And if you're looking to buy a business, you need to be aware that buying a business requires you to have some experience in that business as well, Diane. So have you ever bought a business before? We say, well, buying a business is a lot easier than starting a business. That is, if you start a business, you kind of have to work your way through all of the elements of it. But if you're buying a business, you already have customers. And those customers produce cash flow. And that gives you the opportunity to raise funds for it, to do the things that are necessary to make it an ongoing enterprise. Right? Another question that's very, very concerning to a lot of people who are thinking of selling the business. Do you plan to run the business, or are you going to resell it? Are you going to be a Sharpie and come in and pick my bones, or are you going to run this business? And that has a lot of dynamics to it in reference to how you position the business. It's important for you to realize that somebody who walks in to buy your business may not want to buy your business. They may want to liquidate your assets, or they may have somebody who is interested in a business like yours, and they're willing to resell it right out from underneath you. I know that sounds very, very threatening, but that's a fact. Di? Another issue that's very important to anybody who's going to be involved in this kind of transaction is it has to be confidential. There has to be a non-disclosure agreement, and that's very important. And by the way, If you get a SCORE mentor, there's 3 things about us you need to know. One is we're free. That's very important. 2, we have a confidentiality agreement and tested for confidentiality. And so everything that you share with us is confidential. And 3rd is that we really have some great people who know how to help. So in this particular area, if you're going to show anybody anything about your business, before you do that, you need to have them sign a confidentiality and non-disclosure agreement. Diane? So the next question is, well, what do I, if I sell my business or if I buy a business, I just give them a check and that's the end of it. No, that's not. You have to have a due diligence process, both in buying and selling. And if I'm going to buy a business, and I have bought many of them, I want to know what I'm buying. I want to know where the pitfalls are. I want to know if I'm in the process stepping into a lawsuit. And those are very important things. So in a due diligence, if somebody is going to buy a business and they're serious about it, there needs to be a due diligence process involved. If they don't know anything about a due diligence process and you do, you have to measure that accordingly. But you need to know the due diligence process. Very important to this is, how are you going to finance this purchase? Well, I have $25,000 in cash, and the rest of it I'm going to raise through the SBA. That really is not a proper solution. So Alan is going to talk about financing these purchases and how you're going to get through that. So it's important you hang on for Alan's presentation. Next. And then, as Alan will go on and explain, how do I know you have the money? Now, you say you have the money, but how do I know that? And it's the same kind of thing that people face when they sell a house. You know, I'll give you $5,000 on this house. I'll hold it off the market for 30 to 90 days, and then I'll pay you more. And in the meantime, I don't want you to keep the $5,000. So it's obvious the same fundamentals apply when you're selling a business. And when you're buying a business, you have to be prepared to have proof of access of funds. It's very important. Next. So Jory is going to talk about how much the business is worth. What is a profit multiplier? That is, you get your profit, you multiply it by a certain number. Jory will be addressing that today in reference to what your business is worth. That's the big question. How much is it worth? You think it's worth a certain number. The buyer and the seller, both of you think different numbers. Also, another way to think about this are comparables. Now, in the real estate market, comparables are very organized in reference to what the size of the house and all that. In a business, it's much more difficult. But that is one of the things that Jory will talk about today. One of the big issues that are part of the profit multiplier is, what is the cash flow of this business? And how do you document that cash flow of the business? How do you prove, either through your tax returns or your bank statements, or or your accounting, what the cash flow of the business is? Because that cash flow is critical in being able to pay for that business. And then the next one is we have some arguments about this. Dennis Zink and Mike and I have argued about whether people want to buy a business and the values of that business, or whether someone just wants to buy the assets. And the asset validation may be all that you're selling, or the asset validation goes along with the profit multiplier. It's all part of a formula that you make up. And Mike will talk about some of those things in his presentation. So, do you want to sell the business? Well, it all depends. You want to buy a business? It all depends. What's the condition and the suitability of the assets and systems to making that business survive? Many people just get to a point, well, we'll go through that. Many people just get to a point where they think, hey, it's an ongoing business. I get to go to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers games and I get, my business supports all of that. That is not what you sell in a business. So conditions that we might want to think about are the competition. What is the competition to this business you're looking at to buy? Now, remember, buyers have one look to it. A seller has to really understand the competition. You should know the competition as well or better than they know themselves. So you can make that part of what you're pitching. Next. Concentration of customers. What, in your mind, is the most important asset of any business? You have to ask yourself that question. You can ask your spouse, what do you think is the most important element of any business? As you're thinking about that, is it the assets? Many people say it's the people. It's my staff, they're so smart, they do all the right things. Or is it the leader? Is it the person who's leading the business? No, the most important element of any business is the customers. It's what kind of customers you have, the concentration of those customers, and can those customers be counted on to help the business grow? Very important. Keep that in mind. Now, key employees are very important. I'm not minimizing that. But the customers are where you're at. And if you have key employees, you have to be able to know can you run the business with them without you? Or are you a critical key to it? And the issue is really what the buyers are looking for. Yeah? So here are a couple situations. I'll run through these quickly. You're all going to get a copy of this so you can look at it. But there are 5 primary issues that people talk about in reference to owning a business. Do I want to sell it or gift it to a family member? We have had people who want to give it to their kid, and their kid says, I don't want this business. What would I want? I see how you struggle and have to work on the business. Why would I want that for me? So you have to know if they're in the industry, is there more than one person involved? Some people have lots of kids. Are you planning on staying on when you go to do that? Or are you looking to get out and do you need to receive your money either in a lump sum or an ongoing payout? That's very important. That's very pragmatic. And you have to think about that if you're going to sell or gift to a family member. But that's the number one thing that people think about when they're going to sell a business. Next. The next situation, next to selling your family, is your business partner. And business partners, I had some business partners. Everybody has different buy-sell agreements that they put together with the business partners. We would kind of stack things up into 2 piles. We had all the caveats in those deals. But then we would flip a coin, and whoever won the flip got to pick which pile. That's one way to handle business partners. But a business partner knows what an idiot you are, and you know what an idiot they are. And so what you're doing is you're selling to somebody who you know will either succeed or fail with the business. And can you get enough money out of them without giving up too much of your own? So they're familiar with the business, but they are familiar with the business. So a business partner is a good option. Many business partner relationships work that way. Many times a successing partner is the one who gets the business. And the guy who's out of the business or the girl who's out of the business should be happy with what they're doing. They're not responsible for it any longer. They're not burdened by the business. Now, selling to employees, we see this one all the time. Well, these are the best people on earth. I picked every one of them. I know them intimately. They're good, hardworking people. They don't have any financial capability because you didn't pay them enough. And the other question is there anybody who can succeed you? Many people who own businesses are very entrepreneurial and really are multitask capable. And they get to a point where they don't really want anybody to be able to run the business as well as they do. So it's a very difficult thing to consider. And anybody buying a business wants to know, have they considered selling the business to their employees? And it's sometimes there's a whole industry made out of this. ESOPs are all over the place. But that's something that you have to really ask yourself. Will the business succeed? Because you're going to have some skin in the game if you sell it to an employee. The fourth situation is sell to a third party, somebody you don't know. This usually is the best return, but it is the longest and it is the most detailed. The due diligence in a third party is really aggressive. And if you own a business and you're not prepared to share all the information, you won't sell the business. So you need to be able to understand that you're going to go through a due diligence process. And it does take some time. It doesn't happen in a minute or a day. Jory will talk about that when he's talking about what it takes to, how long does it take to sell the business. So selling to a third party is selling to somebody who's got some money and some experience, but you don't know them. The fifth item is to sell to a competitor. And that competitor is going to look at EBITDA. That competitor is really familiar with your industry, familiar with you. They probably know you as well as you know yourself. They probably have already made a determination as to whether or not you could make the business work or not. And they understand the core of your customers. That's good because it makes for a quick thing. You can position yourself. If you're going to sell to a competitor, you can position yourself so that your processes align with who you think is going to buy you. You can make your colors of your logos, everything, kind of match and blend that. So when they see that, they say, oh yeah, that looks just like us. That's what you have to face with a competitor. The bad news is, once you go down this road, whether they sign a non-compete or a non-disclosure, doesn't really matter. Because if they back out of the deal, they know everything about you. So you got to be very careful when you're dealing that. Remember this term, loose lips sink ships. And so you have to be aware of that as you're going along with it. Those are the five, there's many others as well, but that's 5 different ways that people look in buying or selling a business. And there are 5 different things that you have to be aware of just on the surface to get started with that. Well, our next speaker is Jory Berkowitz. As I said before, guy in the financial services business forever, and wrote a great book called Dinosaurs of Wall Street. If you ever get a chance to read it, it's really good. Jory, the big question is, how do you set the value for this thing? Take it over.
Jory, don't forget to unmute yourself.
Jory, at the bottom of your screen is an unmute. You got to push that.
There you go.
How do you set the value? Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Pete. And I'm good at a lot of things, but apparently not at unmuting myself. Next slide.
Oops.
Next slide. No, go back. Yeah. Now this is kind of a funny slide. You know, intuitively, everybody knows that they want to buy a business in the lower left-hand corner and sell a business at the very top, the apex of that curve. And not everybody does. Not everybody does. Usually there's, in retrospect and hindsight, this becomes the most obvious thing in the world, but the timing of starting a business really depends upon the resources of the business owner, his skill, his ingenuity, his age, and the same thing would apply for the sale of the business. Most people who are owning businesses and are in the prime to aristocracy phase of the business, and even if it starts falling off a little bit, if they've built a comfortable life for themselves and they're proud of their achievements, they're really not going to have the abilities to see into the future, to have tomorrow's newspaper. And oftentimes the sale of the business will occur because the owner becomes too old or frail to run the business, isn't interested in it anymore, or sadly, something terrible, unanticipated may happen to him. You know, he may pass away suddenly. And that creates a huge problem for his heirs and children. So this is a useful slide in the sense that you can't see into the future. You just know that what you see in front of you will happen to every business. There's no business in the world that grows and grows and grows and grows. They all peak, and they all, at best, peak and plateau and never achieve their former glory. And many of them just disappear. Many blue chips simply disappear. If you looked at the Dow Jones Industrial Average in 1930 and compared it to today, I think there's 3 stocks out of the 30 that still trade publicly. So this is just something that I use to let sellers know that selling needs to be planned. You can't guess at where you are on this chart. Next slide, please. Now, valuation is a critically important factor, obviously, for any buyer or any seller. And there are many different ways to establish a business's value. For most small privately held businesses, cash flow, what the business generates in free cash, is critical. EBITDA is used, generally speaking, for larger companies, more complex companies, public companies, substantial private companies. I like that, Pete, your EBITDA. I never saw that before. Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, and coronavirus. That was, I never thought I'd laugh at a joke about coronavirus, but you did it there. But I would focus on cash flow, just to make life simple for yourself. There are many other methods apart from these. There's a discounted cash flow, dividend discount model, just an asset sale, book value, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But most buyers, and obviously most sellers, are going to point to what the business produces in cold hard cash. And then you take that cash, which is an annual figure, and you put a multiple on it, and there you got it. You've got the value of the business. Most public companies today, and I say today, are selling around 16 times earnings, which is not necessarily cash flow, but for the sake of this workshop, close enough comparison. Private companies are not going to sell for 16 times cash flow. They're not even more than likely to ever sell at 6 times cash flow. And the reason for that is fairly simple. Small, privately owned businesses are riskier than large, well-established, publicly held companies. There's a very, very high likelihood that a company like JP Morgan Chase or Exxon is going to be in business a month from now or 6 months from now. That's not the case with your average small business. And the second thing is that if you own a business and you want to sell it, you can't call your broker up and say, get me out. You can't get a confirmation in 30 seconds. So for those reasons, think about multiples at 2-3 times cash flow, maybe 4. And whether it's 2 or 3 or 4 or less or more, of course, like Pete said before, it depends. Next slide, Diane. It depends upon variables. And these are some of them. And if you wanted to, you could probably make a laundry list of 100 or more variables. One-time expenses. If there's a flood in Sarasota and your business is in Sarasota and it was damaged by the flood, that's going to hurt your cash flow. If you're talking about a company that does business in 50 states in the United States, a localized weather event is really not going to have a material impact on their valuation. Owner perks. Think about this. Most public companies, well, they don't have owners, but most public companies want to maximize their earnings. And they can do that in order to juice the price of their stock. I mean, it's pretty apparent. Most private companies aren't looking to maximize the earnings they report to the IRS. They're looking to pay as little tax as possible. That's why you've heard about most business owners that run a lot of their expenses. They didn't have to, but it makes sense for them to run expenses through the business. Many business owners, they purchase a car, they'll have the business purchase the car. Well, if the business owner purchases a used Impala, that's one thing. If he purchases a Rolls Royce, that's another, because that's going to affect the cash flow of the business. And that's something that a buyer needs to look at. You know, how many perks is the owner taking for himself, and what does that do to the long-term profitability of the business? I'm not going to go through every one of these, but just quickly pick out a few. Cash at closing, that's key. In other words, if you have a business that changes hands and the buyer is paying money upfront, all cash, and the owner's not taking paper back, he's not taking an earnout where he's paid in future years some of the purchase price based upon the performance of the business, that's going to affect the value of the business. And all of these things obviously are the subject of intense negotiation before you get to the closing table. Next slide, guys. Okay, how long does it take to sell a business? Well, the interesting thing is, and you can look at the chart, almost nothing sells within 3 months and almost nothing sells after a year. So most businesses that sell, over 80% of them sell between 4 months and a year. Now, that doesn't sound so bad, but the fact is, only 30 to 40% of the businesses that are actually put up for sale get sold. So I can repeat that, but I think you heard me the first time. 2/3 of the businesses that owners try and sell don't get sold. So this chart only applies to 1/3 of the business. That's why I'm saying that if you're a seller, you really want to plan this sale well in advance, structured to ensure the highest degree of success. Next slide. Okay, this is 8 boxes, right? SCORE developed this as an outgrowth of something that we've used in the past called the business model canvas. The business model canvas is for business owners who want to operate their business more efficiently and more profitably, and it gives them a way to put a business plan together on one piece of paper. And we looked at the business model canvas and said, how can we apply this to buying and selling a business? We call this the exit strategy canvas. Unfortunately, in the English language, there's not one word for entering and exiting. So if you see exit, it applies equally to a purchase of a business as well as a sale of a business. But these are the things that you'd want to look at and write. This is like a blank canvas, like an artist has a blank canvas, and you want to fill this in with as much information that's going to be actionable for you as you possibly can. What's the background of the business? What's triggering the sale? What's triggering your purchase? What strategies are you going to use? Dropping down center bottom, professionals are your financial advisor, your attorney, your CPA that you want to have on a team to help you do the due diligence, the valuation, competition, et cetera. And so this is something that is really a team job to plan ahead and to plan ahead successfully. Ultimately, you get to payday, and that's how you're going to structure your deal, whether it's an installment sale, all cash, or what have you. Next slide. Okay, so the seller wants to, so the buyer and the seller want to get the deal done.
This is MySpace now.
Oh, it did. Okay, that's why I was a little confused on that. Let me just say one thing, and just to add to the piece that I was talking about for the exit strategy canvas. Just remember there are no fixed rules that apply to valuing a business. There are many fixed rules that you can utilize, but there's not one rule that everybody can use anytime they're looking to buy or sell a business. There are always extenuating factors, and I'm not just talking about floods in Sarasota, but the quality of the management team, customer loyalty, market trends, et cetera. In terms of the financial health of the business, and I think Alan will be getting to this, at a minimum, you would need to provide or demand, depending upon what side of the table you sit on, current financial statements, balance sheet, income statement, tax returns, a list of assets, a list of liabilities, and the like. You need to find out on your own, really, what the competition looks like, and what distinguishes this business, or what you can bring to this business to elevate it and differentiate it from the competition. And the last thing I want to say is what is the future of the industry of the particular business? Many industries are mature. I wouldn't say dying, some die, like buggy whip manufacturers aren't around anymore. But many industries are mature, and particularly in Florida, in this community, where so much is tied into service economy. Many businesses serve the Florida economy, and the Florida economy is predicated on people moving to Florida. I mean, that's basically the economy here. So businesses that are plumbing contractors, electricians, landscapers, painters, anything in the building trades, house cleaners, roof washers, you name it. What can you do to differentiate that business so that it rises above the pack? I think that's really critical. And if you can't answer that question, I think you want to think twice about going into that business or putting your business up for sale before you can answer. Okay, now Alan is going to take this over. I'm sorry, Alan, and talk about the financing side of the equation.
Okay, thank you. I started with this slide because the question always comes up, well, what does the seller have to worry about financing? That's the buyer's problem. And certainly when we sell a house, we expect the realtor or the bank and the buyer to come up with the mortgage. Or if you're a buyer, you don't expect the seller to really get too involved. You have to prove you've got approval for your mortgage. But in the case of selling a business, it's much different because, first of all, obviously the seller wants to get the deal done. So if for no other reason, you certainly would want to make sure that it gets done. Also, the seller might have funding sources that the buyer doesn't know about. But most importantly, the value and the finance are intertwined. So you can, as a seller, you can create a higher value for your business by being more agreeable to things that are involved with financing. So you can agree to take back a note or to stay in the business. If you can help the buyer find lower interest, that's more cash to you because the buyer's probably got a budget, and if less is going interest, then more is available to pay a principal. You might agree to less cash up front if the buyer says, well, I'll give you less now, but I'll give you more in total, or you can stay in the business, or you can indemnify for liabilities that you might otherwise want to indemnify. You could take stock instead of cash. There's a lot of things you can do as a seller that would actually change the value of your business and not simply make it so that the buyer has financing. And the deals that I've seen done, especially when it's not Jory made the distinction between a public company that you can buy on the stock exchange and a private kind of deal that we're probably talking about here. These things make a much bigger impact in the private deals than they do. I mean, they wouldn't make any impact if you want to buy stock in Exxon, for example. Next slide, please. So, of course, the most obvious way to get money is to borrow it. And if you want to go to your bank or any bank, certainly you're going to discuss the term and the rate and how much down payment, the very basic things. But when it's a business, the bank's going to ask you about collateral. In fact, they're going to jump to collateral very quickly. And you may have collateral that's obvious. You may have some trucks or some buildings or things like that that are obvious collateral. You also have inventory. And so the question is your inventory good collateral, or is it just junk that's been sitting in the warehouse for 2 years and nobody's ever going to buy it? Look at your receivables. These are receivables referred to money that's owed to the business by its customers. Are these receivables being paid easily, quickly, on time, or do companies owe money for months or years on end? These make a big difference for your collateral and for your ability to borrow the money. There could be stock. You could even pledge assets outside the business as collateral for the business. That's kind of risky, of course, but first time I did a business, I went to see my banker, and I had a private banker, so he knew me. I brought a business plan that I was very proud of, and I noticed that he's just kind of perfunctory leafing through it, not really giving it much attention. And so finally I said, so you're not even looking at the business plan. I guess you expect me to put my house up as collateral. And he said, well, yeah, this business of yours, it's a service business. I don't see any of the collateral. I said, all right, then forget the business plan, forget the business loan. Let's just do a home equity loan. That's easier, cheaper, and faster. And that's what we did. So, you if you're flexible and you understand what's out there, you can create assets for the collateral that are better than the business and likely to get you better terms as a buyer. Small Business Administration, SBA, we're very familiar with them. They're the chief funder of SCORE, very close to them. They do have money, but there's two things you need to know. One is they're often going to want to be in front. You can't pay the SBA and other lenders at the same time. The SBA generally wants to get paid before anyone else. So you have to be willing to do that and understand that you're in essence screwing the other lenders. So they got to know that too. And the other is you're still going to put up in collateral. I mean, they're great. They're going to lend you money. They're not loan sharks. They're going to charge you a decent interest rate, but they're also going to expect collateral. And I know of situations where people have gotten SBA loans. The business has gone bust, maybe through no fault of theirs, and the SBA took the collateral. So you're still dealing with real businesses and real contracts. Then, of course, there's third parties, all kinds of. We have a whole seminar on ways you can get money from third parties. So I won't try to review all of that here right now. One thing you can do, and this is quite common, is an earnout. So the price is flexible. It's a function of how the business performs after the sale, right? So, as a buyer, you might want an earnout because you really don't know how well the business is going to do. As a seller, you need to understand that you're still taking a lot of risk. And if the clients are all going to leave because the business isn't being well run after you've left, you're not going to get the money either because the price remains a function of how it performs. But if you're going to do that, you should get a better price for assuming the risk. I mean, it's sort of like axiomatic in contracts that the party that's assuming more risk should be paid for assuming that risk. And of course, one way to ensure that the earnout does well is to stay in the business. So the owner stays there, manages it with his team, and kind of ensures that it's going to keep doing well. Now, think back to what Peter talked about, the situations where you might want to sell. Obviously, if you got to get out of the business for whatever reason, this is not a good strategy. But if you can stay in for a few years and help ensure that the owner earnout does well, you're going to end up making more money. Now, if you do this, the formula needs to be well understood. It can't be loose. It can't be, we'll see how it goes. You have to have a good formula. You might want an escrow account, which says that, the buyer's going to put up more money than you're going to get, but at least it's put up. It's there, and there are clear rules as to when it can be turned over to you. An earnout also has to handle contingencies because the world's going to change. Your competitors are going to do different things. Your products are going to do different things. The economy is going to change. And so the earnout rules have to handle these contingencies, and they have to allow the earnout to be even extended if necessary, within obviously preset parameters, so that you can't just make it up as you go. But and of course, if interest rates change, and look at the last 6 months, we've had more interest rate changes in the last 6 months than in the last 6 years. And an earnout, since time value of money is very important, has to have a formula to handle the changes in interest rates. So it can be a great idea, but you got to make sure you do the homework and spend the time to document it properly. Next slide. Now, the leveraged buyout is a term, and Jory again made a real distinction between big public companies and little private deals. Generally, we don't use the word leveraged buyout, except when we're talking about big companies buying other big companies. But the concept applies almost anywhere. In essence, what we're saying is you buy a company with their own cash, because they have so much cash or so many cashable assets that you can borrow the money with all those assets or that cash as collateral for that buyout. Often the lender will get some equity or some warrants. Warrants are kind of like equity, but instead of giving the equity now, you give them the right to have equity in the future, either for free or for a preset price. But that way the lender feels like if the business does well, I'll do well too. I won't just get interest. And maybe the lender's more willing to advance the money, knowing that he has some skin in the deal. So what kind of companies are good for leveraged buyouts? Well, obviously they need to be profitable. We need to believe that's going to continue. And certainly they have to have low debt, because you're going to burden it with a lot of debt. So if they have a lot of debt already, that's just not going to work. We mentioned collateral 6 different ways, but it has to be good collateral and stable and predictable cash flows. And that's important. Even go back to what Jory said about valuation. If your valuation is based on your cash flow, you better be able to predict some future ones or there's no valuation. Well, that's true also in the leveraged buyout situation because those cash flows have to pay back the loan. The lender doesn't want to foreclose. The lender doesn't want to hear about bankruptcy. The lender wants to know that the money's there to pay back the loan. Next slide. Now, a lot of mergers, and this again, it's probably more true of bigger ones, but we've seen it a lot here, even here in Florida, of small companies doing strategic mergers where neither party wants to get out of the business. Neither party's had it. Neither party wants to leave, but they realize if they get together, they can have some synergy. And synergy is an overused word in the merger business. Most mergers don't create synergy. In fact, they destroy value. But to the extent you can do it right, you can create synergy where the total's better than the sum of the parts. And the price then depends both on the value of the company being acquired and the value of the acquirer's stock, because a lot of that stock may be used as payment. Now, since it's strategic, it's often competitors getting together. So you have to consider that the regulators might want to jump in and sometimes they're going to drive you crazy. They're going to say it doesn't make sense when in fact it does. And your only way of getting through that is some expensive legal help. I'm not going to talk much about the arbitrage opportunity, but it just states that an investor can look at the potential merger and kind of decide, like if you look right now with Elon Musk buying Twitter, there was an arbitrage opportunity there because the price did change from the initial offer. And we still don't know for sure if it's going to go through. So there's an opportunity to bet on it, make money if you're right or lose money if you're wrong. You can do a strategic merger and you want to be sure that you're not destroying value. You need the measures of value, and earnings per share is not a good one. Earnings per share is not a good way to tell if a merger was done right. You need to look at true valuation. So look at return on equity or return on invested capital. Look at what it is before the merger, forecast what it will be after the merger, and then go back and see if it's good as with the forecast. But you need to look at valuation measures and not just earnings per share, because you can goose that with GAAP accounting, as Jory mentioned. It's not a measure of success. I put in the point about modern portfolio theory. I mean, obviously that's a whole seminar right there. But what I'm saying is, when you value the strategic merger, look at, does it give the two companies a chance to have greater return than they could individually? Does it give them a chance to reduce risk, as it might be the case if competitors were to join, they might reduce risk. That's the aspect of modern portfolio theory that I'm talking about. Now, the seller can retain branding or become part of the parent, or it can go the other way. A company in North Carolina called Nations Bank bought a California bank called Bank of America and decided that that's such a good name, we'll call the whole thing Bank of America. And most people never even realized that Bank of America was just a small California bank, and the Nations Bank was the big one, because Nations Bank thought giving up the name was better. Let's be all the name of our acquired company, Bank of America. And certainly that's worked out well for them. And of course, you need indemnities, even in a strategic merger, because they're just unknowns, things that can come up later. Next slide. And, it's already been a lot of talk about due diligence. Certainly you have to do it. Don't try to avoid it. You'll be sorry later if you don't do due diligence. You can buy a house whether without getting a home inspection or with getting a home inspection. It may not make a huge difference. It makes a huge difference when you're merging businesses. You certainly want audited statements if they exist with the auditor letters. Frequently they don't exist for small companies. They never got anything audited. but you still want them in proper form, and you want to be able to model what they're going to look like after the merger. So you look at forecast as well as historical. Inventory is a really big deal. I mentioned it already as collateral, but also you want to see what's actually there. Get someone on a forklift and drive through that warehouse and figure out what the inventory actually is, and especially what's been there too long and not selling. If they've been using LIFO and there's some issues on how much tax is still due to convert to FIFO or to stay with LIFO. It's really getting in the weeds. I'm not going to go into detail here, but it's really important if you're buying your business with a lot of inventory. We talk about testing the receivables and the payables. So really want to test the receivables. Call the people who supposedly owe the money and say, do you know that you owe Acme Widget this money, and are you ever going to pay? And a lot can be learned from a few phone calls. You want to test the payables too. It's not as big an issue as testing receivables, but you still want to test it, because maybe you call someone who's on the payable list and say, I'm thinking about buying Acme Widgets, and they say they owe you money. Are they a good payer? And if they're not, it's something else you want to take a look at. Also looks like I may have misspelled accounts, but I don't remember now how to spell it. There are other clues too with buy-sell agreements. Buy-sell agreements typically are insurance that you buy so that if one partner dies, the other partners can buy that person's share of the business. Insurance steps in to do that. And I've seen deals where the buy-sell agreement was for, say, a valuation, let's pick a number, $3 million. And now the company's on the block for 20 million. Well, you want to look at that and say, if you guys only thought it was worth 3, tell me why I should pay you 20. And so if you're a potential seller, make sure that your buy-sell agreements are consistent with the valuation that you feel for your company. You don't want any kind of inconsistencies there. So moving on, sort of have good news and bad news here. Actually, it's the same news. The bad news is you can't get through this without listening to a lawyer. The good news is it's a good lawyer. He has a lot of experience in this area and a lot of interesting things to say. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Thank you, Alan. What I have to say now is based upon the fact that you've looked at a business and now you're thinking that you really want to buy it, or you find a buyer and you really want to sell it. And the first mistake that you can make is to say, well, you know what? This is a simple deal. I can handle it myself. That is absolutely the worst thing that can happen. As a law firm, we used to make more money on trying to straighten out deals where people got into trouble because they thought they could handle it themselves. So I would suggest as a SCORE member that the first place you go for the free advice is a SCORE consultant that you could rely on to help you get in the right direction. And they can send you, if you need a broker, they can get you to a good broker or tell you whether yours is good, and make sure that you're using a good accountant and a good attorney. And with a broker, the most important thing that I learned over the years, and I hope there's no brokers who are going to be offended, but make sure that the only job that the broker does is to bring together the buyer and the seller. So many brokers say, listen, I've got a sample agreement. Why don't you use that? I'll save you money. You don't have to go to a lawyer. Don't do it, because actually the brokers has a terrible conflict of interest. All the broker really cares about is closing the deal and getting a commission. So once you've gotten the broker and get the buyer and the seller together, make sure you get a good attorney and a good accountant. Don't go to the attorney who handled your brother-in-law's divorce and did a great job and never had a business deal. Make sure you've got experienced accountants and attorneys who have been through these kind of deals before. So that's very, very important. Next slide. Once you've made a decision that you're going to go ahead or want to go further, you should have a letter of intent. Now, if you're dealing with an outsider, it's the letter of intent. If you're dealing with either a partner, then you should make sure you're looking at your either operating agreement if you're an LLC, or the shareholders agreement, just to make sure you're following it. One of my pet peeves is at that point, you're able to discover that you really don't have an appropriate partnership agreement. Make sure if anybody is in business with, this is totally outside of buying and selling, but anyone who's in business with a partner, co-owner or whatever, make sure you got adequate, appropriate agreements that are going to cover you and they're up to date. The key to the offer is whether you're going to buy stock or you're going to buy assets. There's a huge difference that we're going to get into in a little while, but I very often have even drawn a letter of intent saying that if I buy the stock, here's what I'll pay, and if I'll buy the assets, here's what I'll pay. And because the difference, as we'll show you in a while, is tremendous between the buyers and the sellers. The letter of intent should propose the purchase price. Now, you're not going to have an accurate purchase price because you really haven't done due diligence. All you've seen is the offering circular that the seller has prepared. So what you do is you talk about contingencies, additions to it, changes that'll be made to it, but here's how you're going to do the purchase price, and it's not going to be a final. Next slide. You should provide for how due diligence is going to be done. Everybody's been talking about due diligence. It is so important. Make sure you have it, when it's going to start, who's going to do it, and a time frame in which it must be completed. Next, the timing of the transaction has to be set in. So you say, all right, if everything's not completed by X date, then the whole deal is off and my offer is withdrawn. You can always try to extend that as it goes along. As it was said before, you have to have a non-disclosure agreement. What you want to make sure of is that whoever you're showing it to is not suddenly going to say, oh, it would be a good deal, but you know what? I can make my own company now that I know who your employees are, who your customers are. Why do I need to buy you? And you want to make sure you've got a good, solid agreement for that. Next is the contingencies. Contingencies have to be really well thought out. Is it contingent on financing? Is it contingent on a lease being renewed or extended or approved? Is it any of these things? How about some key employees, making sure they stay? How about talking to maybe a key customer to make sure that they're going to stay? Things like that. You got to be very careful with that. And the letter of intent is usually non-binding. The things that are binding, though, is the non-disclosure. Other things that you'd prepare the letter of intent is there might be a down goodwill payment. Is that going to be forfeited if you don't close? Is it applied to the purchase price later on? And you also have to prohibit any dealings with any others so that the seller can't be shopping you at the same time that you're doing your due diligence. Next slide. As we said, the stock and the asset sale are like night and day. The stock sale means it also applies to an LLC if you happen to have that, where you sell the membership interest. Merely you take the stock certificate, you turn it over, and the person now owns that company. Everything that was in the company goes along with it in exactly the same way that it was before. Your basis in your stock is what you paid, but none of the basis gets reallocated among the assets. So if you were to have heavily depreciation assets and you bought stock and they were fully depreciated, you would not be able to get any more depreciation from those assets. On the asset sale, on the other hand, you might have purchased the assets and then you'll get a step up in basis. If any of those were subject to a sales tax, though, you're going to have to pay a sales tax at that time for the asset sale. The buyer will prefer an asset sale. The seller will prefer a stock sale. And very often the negotiations that take place deal with how can I end up with the same type of a final bottom line with one as I would with the other. This, again, is why you need a good accountant who's going to go through it and say, if you do this, if you do that, here's what you'd end up with, and here's the problems that you would have. So that's extremely important. The other thing I forgot to mention above was that the other party says, listen, why should you go pay for your own lawyer or your own accountant? I've got an awfully good one. This is a simple deal. Why don't we just use the one person and will share the split, the cost. This is probably the worst idea that you could have. The reason is that that accountant or that lawyer has a duty to serve one person and not the other. And as we see, there's all kinds of negotiations and things that affect them differently. As a result of that, each of you should have your own competent accountant and your own competent lawyer. One way that you can change things as far as the tax consequences is you say, listen, I'll pay less for the stock, so you'll get a little less capital gains. But let's put more into a covenant not to compete or a consulting and employment agreement where I could take a deduction as the buyer and you can take ordinary income. And these are some of the negotiations that go on. When you do buy stock, you get fully every liability that was there, whether you knew about it, whether it's hidden, whether it shows up later. This would be taxes. But there's also now a rule that says for a sale of assets, if the seller had a PPC liability as a result of the COVID loans, that loan will follow the assets unless the government specifically waives it. So you're going to have to get a waiver of that. In New York State, where I practiced for years, there was a sales tax provision that if you bought assets, the sales tax department could have a claim on any past sales taxes that were underestimated or underpaid, and unless they waived it. So every sale of assets in New York, I don't know if it's so in any other states, had to wait until we got a waiver from the sales tax people saying that your sales tax is up to date and you don't have any further liability. Next. So what the buyer really wants here is the ability to depreciate the assets. Particularly, I mean, if you've got a service business, it's not going to matter. There's no assets really to depreciate. But if you've got a manufacturing business with heavy machinery or a lot of vehicles and things like that, that could really affect the bottom line, is to be able to take depreciation. Next, he also wants to be able to deduct ordinary business expenses. And payments are a covenant not to compete, or employment contract, or a consulting agreement are deductible by the person who pays it. So that's another reason. You might want to utilize previous tax losses. I've had people who bought businesses solely because there was huge tax losses and they wanted to put together. The government realized this was being done, so now there's very strict rules. So if you're thinking of this, make sure you go to a good accountant to decide how that's going to work. And the next is they also want to be indemnified from all prior liabilities of the seller. Now, how do you do that? Well, you talk about an escrow account, you talk about security. Indemnification is very, very important for something like that. Next, what the seller wants capital gains. Their taxes are going to be considerably less. Next, they don't want to have the depreciation recapture. If you had a lot of depreciable assets and you sold the assets, you might have to recapture some of that depreciation. Again, that's what a good accountant is going to be able to help you with. You want as much money as possible up front. You want any future payments. You want security. A lot of this has been talked about, and I know we're running a little late, so I don't want to waste a lot of time. And you want indemnification after the closing for anything that happens, to make sure that you're not going to be on the hook for something that the buyer does. Had a situation in our hometown. Luckily, we weren't involved. A lawyer inherited a business from his father and decided to sell it. He didn't realize that before his father had died, he had guaranteed all the corporate loans with a particular bank. He found a buyer, sold it to the buyer. The buyer went to the same bank, took out a loan, and the buyer went bankrupt. His guarantee was still at the bank, had never been removed. So the bank came to the original, the lawyer who was the seller, and said, they owe $1 million and you guaranteed all debts. He said, oh my God, I got out of there. Why did that disappear? Well, We still had it. If you had asked for it, we would have given it back, but you got stuck for it and he had to pay that kind of money. It was tremendous. We talked about financial due diligence. Here's what you got to look at from a legal standpoint. Income and sales tax returns. Make sure that they've been filed properly. All payments have been made. You could be responsible. Excuse me. You should review all leases. When we talk about leases, it's not just real estate leases. You might have computer leases, you might have equipment leases, you can have all different kinds of leases. And what you have to do with those is to make sure when you look at them, that number one, that they're assumable or assignable. If they're not, you have to get permission from the landlord or the lessor. And you have to see how long they have to run. If they're going to run out in a couple of months and there's no guarantee of a renewal, you've got to make sure that that's a contingency that you're going to have to make sure that those leases are going to be where you think they're going to be. Real estate titles, you have to check those and check liens. Now, one of the key liens that you check is the Uniform Commercial Code liens. Every state has security interests which are filed, usually in the county level and at the state level. And you should do a full search of those to see if there's any liens outstanding. One of the things that we found was that usually there are dozens of liens on every company that have long been paid off but are still on the books as liens. And that's because they got paid off and no one bothered to get them released. Very often, the bank sold it to another bank and that went to various places. To try to get those releases are very important because you don't want any of those that are not applicable still on the books. You should also check all employment contracts, consulting contracts, non-competes that might be there, any buy-sells, as we said before, between the stockholders, partners, and what have you, all to see if they're still in effect, whether they're valid or whether they would cause an airplane overhead. Oh, wait a second. Whether the sale that you're contemplating would cause a default under the particular agreement. This is particularly so with the bank loans and mortgage documents. So those should be kept very carefully. If there's intellectual properties, check to see if there's good title, how much longer they have to run, whether there's other people who have rights to it, whether it's exclusive and things like that. And then obviously open sales and purchase orders. You should also check licenses or permits that may be required. If it's a restaurant, you might have to see it. Maybe it's not transferable. You have to get a city or a state or a county permit. All these things are things that are there. What happens after due diligences and everybody's satisfied? So now you have a letter of intent and the buyer will make sure that the financing is finalized. The last thing you want to do is to find yourself at closing and still worrying where the financing is coming from. Then what happens is you draw a purchase and sale agreement. This agreement is normally prepared by the buyer because the buyer wants to make sure all the things they want in there is in there. When I used to represent buyers and the sellers, oh, I've got one, I had one before. I ended up, took me longer to revise something that was improperly drawn than if I started from scratch. So it's much better to start and do that on your own. All exhibits are prepared. The exhibits are the employment agreements, the consulting agreements, all the things that continue afterwards, notes, security interests, stock pledge agreements. They should all have been signed and they're attached to the sale agreement, but they're not signed until the closing. So once everything is finally agreed upon, the closing occurs, the exhibits get signed, the purchase price gets paid, and then you can give your notice to employees, suppliers, customers, and the public, and you file any security interests, escrow set up that need to be done. I think that's just a quick survey. As you can see, it's really complicated. It's hard to do that in a short period of time. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to make sure you have good quality professional help with you along this lines. It'll cost you less in the long term than it would if you didn't have it. Thank you. So I think we're going back to Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And boy, I got to say, all three of you guys did a great job. And I know there's a lot of detail to this. Let's talk about what we looked at. First, you got to understand the business, and you got to know all the elements of the business before you consider buying one, or even when you're going to sell it, you have to be able to explain it. Then you got to identify the risks, Diane, and that is, what is the condition? Who's the competition? What are the key employees? And most importantly, what is the concentration of your customers? And then you got to review the budget and make projections. And a lot of people don't do this. They don't go through the process or the exercise of trying to determine what is the arithmetic involved in this and how they're going to handle the transition plan. Next slide. So just to summarize quickly, how much is the business worth? Jory addressed that, I think, very well. Prepare a confidential selling document is one of the things we didn't talk about today, but that's one of the things you need to do. And then you need to know how to present that selling package. You also need to know how long it's going to take to do this. You got to hire experienced professionals. You got to have the right financing lined up. And remember, loose lips sink ships. So you got to be confidential, and you got to get a score mentor. Remember, they're free, they're confidential, and there's a lot of expertise there that you can draw on. By the way, all of us are score members. All of us help different score mentors mentor. So we are what they call subject matter experts. That's what it is. So we're subject matter experts. Thank you very much for being with us. Today was not to solve all your problems, but to let you know you have help. Thank you, Diane.
Well, we have a couple of questions, and the first question I know is going to have a number of you jumping on this to answer it. Here's the question. Gus wants to know, what is the actual benefit of a business broker, and how are they paid and how much? And there's a follow-up from Jan that says, most ask for 10% commission. Is that negotiable? Who wants to tackle that?
Well, let me take a shot at it. First off, there is no such thing as a fixed fee or fixed percentage in any industry that buys and sells. And business brokers in the state of Florida are all tied to the same rules of the real estate brokers. So no, 10% is not unreasonable. And 10%, yeah, many of them even charge 10% with a retainer. So you have to look at that from that perspective. But you need to see who that broker has dealt with in the past and what is their steps based on some of the things we've talked about. We work as mentors with business brokers. We don't take the role of a business broker, but we do work with the client to help them navigate their way through the business broker relationship. So that's hopefully that answers your question.
So you would say that a business broker is actually a good person to have?
A business broker, if he's the right person for you, and if they get the job done, yeah, that's good. You may want to sell your business, but you don't have any contacts, or you don't know how to get access to any of the buyers out there. So you're just going to be sitting on the fence waiting for a train to go by.
That's right.
And that really isn't going to do you any good. A business broker can help you get to a completed deal.
Diane, I just want to jump in. A business broker is an intermediary. He's a financial intermediary. And a financial intermediary could be a business broker. He could be your attorney. He could be your accountant. He could be a generalist financial advisor, a well-established insurance agent. In other words, these are people that hang out with the money, and they camp by the money river. So they have networks. Okay, and the business broker is most appropriate either for a business owner who wants to sell and has no network and no ability to create one for himself, or if the business broker himself has been in business for 10, 20 years or more and has done a number of substantial deals and has a track record to back it up. So I wouldn't blanket say they're necessary or they're to be avoided, like Pete said at the outset of this presentation, it depends.
Maxwell has
Can
a
I
really,
jump in as well? I think that I used to prefer if a client was in that looking phase to talk to their accountants, talk to their lawyers to see if they had any clients who were similarly looking for the opposite, to buy or sell, something like that. And I only went to the broker and try to pick a broker who specialized in the particular area that you have. I mean, you don't want to get somebody who sells medical practices to sell your retail store necessarily. You
good,
want to make sure that you find, and they specialize, I'm sure they do.
wonderful advice. Maxwell has another good question. Is this a good time to buy a business in light of COVID, supply chain issues, inflation, and raising interest rates? Is there opportunity for a buyer to acquire a distressed business or business being sold at a discount?
It depends.
You sound like a lawyer.
I'm more familiar with the public markets than the private markets, but when you think of this, that the best opportunity in the last 100 years to get active in the stock market was in 1933, the week that Franklin Roosevelt shut down the American banking system, closed the banks for a week. At the height, of the Depression, the depths of despair, that was the opportunity. So we have a strange situation in the economy right now where some sectors are suffering. Inflation is hurting the consumer, but unemployment is incredibly low, given all of that. So it's really a mixed bag. And I think without trying to pick a bottom, you really need to look at a business in terms of if you're looking at buying what your resources are, what the business owner is asking for the business, what the opportunity for that particular business is, what your financing costs will be. And it really wouldn't matter. You would go through the same process whether you made this decision before COVID or 2 years from now, same process.
Okay, David has a question. My question is, do SCORE mentors assist with formulating a letter to solicit businesses who are off market?
No, our job is to help you help yourself.
Yes.
We as SCORE mentors are there to be a sounding board and to keep pointing you in the proper direction. You do not abdicate your responsibility to make your own good decisions or bad decisions. We're there to at least be an advisory service to you. And we don't charge anything for it. We're free. And we don't take on any interest in the business. There's no contingent liability for you to do business with us. But when we talk about our mentors and our subject matter experts, these are people who know more about this business than your mother-in-law does. And that's something that you should be thinking of very seriously.
Well, I think as someone described, we are mentors, not consultants. We guide you, we don't do the work.
That's right. Very well said, Diane.
Dan had said that his business has doubled in revenue since COVID. So you can buy businesses that are really possibly.
Well, absolutely. I think the issue is in real estate, you could have bought something 3 or 4 years ago for half of what it is today.
Mm.
So there's no formula for that other than you have to look at the opportunity and be very careful. Just as Alan had said, in the financing of it, you have to be aware of all of the different covenants that are there, and you have to determine whether or not you can cover those interest payments. And so leverage is a very dangerous thing in our society right now.
All right, well, that is all of the open questions, gentlemen. You did a fabulous job as usual. We even have some folks who said they're going to be applying for a mentor, and we'll look forward to working with any or all of you on their sale or purchase. So good job. I hope that people understand that buying and selling a business is not that easy, and you really need some help. So thank you all. And
Thanks for coming, everybody.
to seeing you again.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.